Okay, so first, to begin, some instructions. So in this part of the competition, you are taking on a fictional business identity, and you're assigning one to us. And from your executive summaries, it looks like we are the board of directors of Nestle. And we'll stay in that role during your entire 25-minute presentation, and then for a 10 to 15-minute Q&A session, questions and answers after. At the end of all of that, we're going to stop. You're going to actually breathe, and then we'll give you some feedback. And also at the end, we'll tell you a little bit about us, so who we are and what we've done. So whenever you're ready, just say the word, and I will start the timer. Yes, and I will tell you when you have 2 minutes left.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. So, good morning. We heard your request to do an investigation about ways that Nestle can be more sustainable. And we wanted to take a moment to thank you all for being here, first and foremost, and also hope that you were able to get a cup of coffee before we started this morning. And throughout our presentation, we hope you'll learn a lot more about where that coffee came from and ways that we can make it more sustainable. So I'd like to start by introducing our team, the Leeverlie Group, and our mission to brew a better future. My name is Emily.
My name is Ben.
I'm Taylor.
And my name is Dominic. So, the first big question, or to provide a brief overview of our presentation today, we're going to look at why Nestle, why we believe partnering with y'all is such a big impact and can have such a great impact on the world. Looking at the coffee production cycle, each step along the process and where waste accumulates along that process. Possible solutions, ways that the coffee grounds that are a waste product of the coffee can be utilized in different aspects. Utilizing a breakdown of these different solutions, providing a final recommendation and implementation strategy for how we want to go about it in step-by-step process. So the first big question, why Nestle? Well, as we understand, just taking a brief look at that picture in the top right corner, we understand that Nestle has a great overview of the entire food industry, generating last year over $105 billion. And we understand that we serve over 188 countries, of which there are only 195 in the entire world. So having this global presence, we understand that Nestle can have a great impact across the entire world. And in terms of the coffee industry, 1 in every 7 cups of coffee are a Nestle product. So we understand that in terms of this, that Nestle occupies 22% of the coffee industry as a whole, which is an incredible statistic. Looking to why Nestle in terms of sustainability, we understand that there are already goals set out in terms of planting 32 million trees around the world by 2030 and implementing 100% responsible coffee sourcing by 2025. Our strategies will synergize well with the current goals already set out by Nestle and will lend a helping hand as to not be off-putting to Nestle. So the next question, why coffee? So as it stands, we understand that every year there are 6 million tons of spent coffee grounds that are produced in the coffee industry. To visualize this number a bit better, let's imagine this. If you were to take a 2-inch thick bed of coffee grounds and spread it, you could cover the entirety of San Francisco. So we understand as well that many people feel that they can just toss their coffee grounds away into the trash or maybe into the gardens. While this can be a viable solution, we understand that on the commercial level, many of the coffee grounds are put into landfills. And when put into these landfills, they accumulate methane gas. The most common gas, CO2, when compared to methane gas, we understand that methane has a 21% greater greenhouse effect. So placing these coffee grounds into landfills is accumulating this methane gas, hurting the environment and also creating acidic leachate, which pollutes groundwater and surrounding areas of water. And looking at the opportunities ahead, we understand that these coffee grounds, looking at the lighter side of things, that they can not only be utilized for good, but they have properties such as carbon rich in oils and are high in nitrogen content. So we'll be investigating 3 potential solutions for how these coffee grounds can be better utilized. Now I'm going to pass it on to Taylor to talk a little bit more about the process itself.
So to fully understand why we are talking about spent coffee grounds specifically, we have to go through the whole process of how Nestle produces its coffee products. So the first step is at the farm level. Nestle works with both local and commercial grade farms. This is where the coffee cherries are actually produced, which is not really workable. So you have to go in and dry and dehull the coffee. This is where the coffee beans can actually be extracted from the coffee cherry. This is normally done by the farms, and Nestle steps in during the roasting process where we get the coffee flavor that we know and love, the coffee bean. This is where some products can go and be sold out as coffee beans purely, but a lot of Nestle's products go a further step and go into a grind. Coffee beans are grinded and then brewed by either the instant coffee grounds or any other sort of out-of-house coffee with Nescafes. To take a look at the waste side of things, we're going to focus on the decomposition process, roasting and brewing. Decomposition, again, is focused more on the farming level, so it's a little bit harder to kind of target and Nestle control since they have so many different producers of coffee. The roasting, silver skin is produced, which is this thin adhesive to the coffee bean. Not too much is produced from each coffee bean specifically, so we're going to look at the brewing. And that's where those spent coffee grounds are. That's that powder that is used up after the coffee beans are brewed. To visualize this a bit better, we're going to look at this. 60% of every ton of coffee produced is that spent coffee ground waste, which is a considerable number, which is why we're trying to target it, because right now, 75% of that is underutilized and just going to landfills, when it has a really great nutritional component to it, where we can actually make some sustainable changes at a greater scale since Nestle's influence as a whole, as a corporation. With that, I'm going to pass it over to Emily to talk more about our solutions to that.
So we have researched and investigated 3 viable solutions. We'll start with the first one, which is as a remover of heavy metals from water. Coffee grounds, because of their structure, they're very porous, and they can easily absorb a lot of different compounds. So coffee grounds on their own, very absorbent and effective at removing heavy metals. However, they're very hard to extract from the water once they have been put into the water. So a team of scientists out of Italy has created the solution that makes the coffee grounds a sponge-like material, kind of like a chocolate cake look. They do this by drying the coffee grounds. They're ground to an extremely fine powder, and then the powder is combined with a silicon polymer and sugar and mixed together, set in a fume hood overnight to solidify the mixture. Then the mixture is put into hot water for a couple hours and kind of shaken just to dissolve the sugar. And then you have a heavy metal remover, and this can be used as a filter or just an absorbent in still water. In still water, it was extremely effective, 99% removal of these toxic chemicals, such as lead, which can cause reproductive issues, brain damage, and arsenic. We know that can be fatal. So really nasty metals that can be taken out of our water. In moving water, it was only 67% effective. However, this is on par with the traditional products that are used during this process. And these products, such as activated charcoal, are very expensive. They're much more expensive than spent coffee grounds, which have almost no value. So going through this pretty simple process, you get an extremely useful and effective solution to removing heavy metals out of wastewater and also industrial sites. So let's look at a summary, kind of an overview of the benefits that this solution can have. First, it's entirely biodegradable. So even though there is a small amount of silicon, the amount is so small that it can just degrade into the environment completely. It's reusable. This sponge can be used up to 10 times and still be effective, which is unlike common methods, which can't be used or regained. Lastly, or third, it's easily handled. So you can just pick it up and move it. It doesn't have any negative safety effects on the scientists. And next, legal implications. This is a legal method. Coffee is non-toxic. The components of the mixture are non-toxic. There's nothing preventing this from being a viable solution. So with that, we want to move on to our next solution.
So we understand that coffee is used to power America through its people every morning. But did you know that coffee can also be used to power engines and cars? And in recent studies that we investigated, we found a way that coffee grounds can be produced into biofuel. So what does this look like? So first, the coffee grounds that are transported to biofuel factories usually contain water, so that's required to be evaporated off to dry the coffee grounds. And then the coffee grounds are mixed with hexane, which is a solvent which extracts the oil from the coffee grounds. Separating out the coffee grounds, we now have this oil mixture, which we combine with methanol and a catalyst. Heating this mixture provides through some chemistry process that then combines the methanol with the hexane oil to create biofuel. And along this reaction, we see there are some byproducts which are created, such as glycerol and some other spent trace products which must be separated out. But at the end of it, we are left with a usable biofuel. Now, what is the feasibility of a solution like this? Looking first at the highs, the conversion process and yield. We understand that coffee grounds have a lot of oil, and the process, which is utilized called transesterification, is able to extract 91% of that oil from the coffee grounds, thus making the most out of what we have currently. Mentioning that ester content earlier on, we see that this process creates a biofuel which has ester content of 89%. Now, to put that in a bit of a frame of reference, we understand that biofuels that are used in current vehicles have an ester content of around 95, 96%. So there's a bit of a gap there. So one of the downsides of this biofuel is that it's more of an additive to current biofuels. However, when you perform this, we understand that the mixed biofuel is much more effective and efficient in engines. We see that the combined biofuel, the mixed biofuel, has lower emissions in terms of CO2, carbon monoxide, and hydrocarbons. So although it is not a standalone biofuel from spent coffee grounds, it is an excellent additive into current fuels. So now that we know that it is a viable solution, what about the scalability and financial aspects? Well, we understand that the scalability from the test that we looked at, specifically a study in Slovakia, looked at a biofuel factory which produced around 120,000 tons of current biofuel from other sorts of seed oils. And looking at the test that was performed along 2023, it produced only 1,228 tons, which is a smaller fraction of what their current capacity is. However, part of this was due to the amount of coffee grounds that they were receiving, what was coming in from the surrounding areas. And looking a bit towards the financial aspects, we understand that there is a comparative advantage long-term, although there may be short-term upfront costs. When producing the biofuel from those spent coffee grounds, we had to modify the factories in order to extract those oils through that transesterification process. So that's going to require an upfront cost. However, in the long term, we see that acquiring these spent coffee grounds, as we know that they're initially just thrown away into the trash, we understand that now we're going to be converting them into something that's truly useful and has a very, very low cost when put into comparison to something that we actually need to purchase. It's something that we can take from already a spent process. And finally, the ethical and legal components. So, as I mentioned earlier, trying to think about before what was happening when we weren't making a change. Coffee grounds were being thrown away into landfills where they were accumulating a dangerous gas that is 21 times greater emission than carbon dioxide. And we're taking this and making it into something that is now producing less emissions than current vehicles across the world. So a net negative effect to a net positive effect. And we understand that Nestle is already taking some initiatives in this area to take spent coffee grounds and make them into energy through steam. But we believe that this process also deserves some merit and some research. Looking into government aid, we understand that governments are always looking to provide some initiatives in terms of providing stipends and aid to companies who want to pursue these new global initiatives. So this is going to be very important, something that we can focus on to maybe help us drive that initial research cost. And finally, ensuring standards are met. Biofuel does have some strict standards that are applied to it. So ensuring that the biofuel that is produced after this process is performed and ensuring that it meets those standards is going to require some initial or some additional costs. However, we feel that it still is very effective. I'm going to pass it on to Taylor to talk a little bit about fertilizer.
So because of the unique hydrogen, carbon to nitrogen ratio that spent coffee grounds have, it actually makes a really good fertilizer when combined with other things. So moving on, just to give a brief background of how the fertilizer can be created. The spent coffee grounds are primarily going to be coming from industrial and commercial grade factories and processing facilities that Nestle already owns. This is a lot easier to transport, so then it can be moved to another facility to have organic additives or poultry litter that kind of balances out those potentially toxic components of the spent coffee grounds. The main major issues that would come from this would be the packaging and distribution of fertilizer, since it does come in a large bag. They sell at least 20-pound bags, especially at an industrial level. This is just something to look out for when trying to do a supply chain system, especially if it's a global one. To look more on the effectiveness of fertilizer with spent coffee grounds, this is already being used on a small scale in some farms. It has been researched, and there is a higher nutrient and water retention in the soil using these spent coffee ground fertilizers. This is really good for long-lasting soil health, and it reduces the amount of soil erosion and bleaching that can come from more synthetic fertilizers over time. It also does create a high level of growth in some plants, like plants that are really good with heat compatible plants like turf grass and vegetables. But it is important to note that unless it is combined with another additive, potentially one that's organic, it is potentially toxic because of that chlorogenic acid that is with spent coffee grounds. That's that caffeine, that tannine that is found. So it has to be added to something else or it potentially could kill a harvest. At a more profitable level, fertilizer as an industry is highly profitable, but it does have major competitors at play, and it's already heavily established as an industry. This makes the barriers to entry a little bit harder to get into, especially with upfront costs of building those factories and equipment, even though it's not as specialized as some other industries to go into. It is a thriving and inelastic industry, though. Agriculture needs fertilizers to kind of continue as a whole, and this is a really good market to get into, especially as they're trying to move to a more sustainable sourcing for fertilizers, since, as I mentioned before, the synthetic fertilizers can have some negative consequences with general soil health and sustainability, both protecting the water sources of people and general agriculture health for the future. There are already some companies that are doing that, with GeoJava being one of them. They're already selling spent coffee grounds to a small scale in the States, which just means that it's already somewhat profitable, and Nestle, with its extensive supply chain and background in a lot of these areas in agriculture, can really benefit from as a whole. At a sustainability level, this is expected to decrease about 50% of the spent coffee ground waste, since that's about all of the coffee grounds that are produced in the industrial and commercial side of things, which is a huge number. And then it also does impact the sustainable food production. With that, it does cause 85% retention of carbon in the soil, which cuts down on that CO2 emissions that Dawn was mentioning earlier, which is huge for the environment. And then there's a broad legal acceptance. Spent coffee grounds is considered an inert substance. It's non-toxic to the environment, so there are no legal issues, both in the North America, Europe, or Asia, which would be the main targets of this solution. Overall, I'm going to pass it to Ben to talk more about the comparison of solutions.
Sweet. So after doing a deep dive into 3 potential solutions, we want to take an actual deep dive analysis into which solution is most feasible, kind of doing a weighted decision matrix, looking at which solution we should actually pursue with Nestle. Looking at 5 different scales, we measured them across 5 different factors. The first one being effectiveness. So looking at how effective this can actually be, this potential solution. Also looking at the ethics of it, which is that sustainability standpoint. Also looking at the scalability, we understand that Nestle is an international company with an international presence on a large supply chain, so we want to make sure that the solution presented is able to scale up to Nestle's operations. Also looking at the financial aspects, kind of looking at the cost effectiveness, are there any cost synergies? Also, are we able to generate profit as Nestle is able to implement the solution? Also, lastly, looking at the legality aspect, this is one aspect we cannot ignore, making sure that the solution we decided to implement, this solution we decided to pursue actually falls in line with all current environmental regulations and making sure we're not stepping across any stones. Currently, Nestle's current operations scores a total of 14, with a 1 being the lowest and a 5 being the highest and being the best in that category. Nestle's current operations, as mentioned earlier, was kind of disposing in those landfills. And across 3 different solutions we have here with heavy metals remover, scoring the highest across all different categories, the highest overall at 19. So that's a solution we decided to go with. So we'll take a deeper dive into the heavy metal remover as our final recommendation and solution. So kind of looking at an implementation point. Now that we actually have our solution, how do we implement this and what does that stage-by-stage process kind of look like? So first, we understand that there is a learning curve to this. With any new solution or any new design, we have to have an internal research and development team. It's tasked to actually look at the environmental benefits or environmental concerns specified with the solution. So kind of looking at how does Nestle actually gain or acquire these coffee grounds, what happens with these coffee grounds next, and how do we actually deliver and make an impact on the environment. We understand that these coffee grounds come from 3 main streams, first being industrial, second being commercial, and lastly being from that consumer residential level. So first kind of looking the industrial side, this is where a lot of that coffee ground waste comes from. A lot of these internal factories or industrial plants. So with all of these, we have to have an internal team in place that where Nestle is able to directly turn that coffee grounds inside its factories and turn it into a heavy metal remover. So that takes a lot of that internal learning curve, but also that internal research and development team as mentioned earlier. Second step of the process is working with those commercial sides or commercial companies. A lot of Nestle's coffee goes to Starbucks, Blue Bottle, or any of these Nest cafes. A lot of this coffee ground waste then gets spent to the landfills or turned into the landfills from that commercial side. So making sure that there is a long-term partnership between Nestle and also the coffee grounds that are spent by these companies that Nestle sends these coffee to. And then this will also create a huge benefit for like Starbucks, Blue Bottle, all these coffee companies as well, because this is a chance for them to build their reputation, build their image in terms of being environmentally conscious. The last part of this is the consumer side, the residential side. Nestle actually sells a lot of its coffee to the hands of the consumer. So when it reaches your hands, how do I actually dispose of this coffee ground in a sustainable but also environmentally friendly way? So we devised a plan where Nestle is able to send the packaging or provide discounts to the consumer who decides to spend or send their coffee ground waste back to Nestle and back to the original source. We're able to turn that into the heavy metal remover like I mentioned earlier. Lastly, after we collected all these coffee grounds, we actually had to find a way to turn this coffee ground into that heavy metal remover to remove those toxic metals from the water. So this is where the last step comes into play. We actually partner with treatment plants or existing treatment plants to be able to like take the water, add silicone, add sugar, and all these necessary chemicals and additives to turn that into the absorbent and remove the metals from the water. So kind of looking at potential risks, there are a lot of risks associated with any solution. However, particularly with this solution, we identified 2 potential risks. The first risk being that there is a variability in effectiveness. Like mentioned earlier, there is some changes in terms of if the water is still, if the water is moving, and there are varying percentages according to that, but also how the coffee is treated, how the coffee is produced, the temperature of the coffee. But to mitigate this risk, we have to develop an internal testing and quality control team. And this is so important to Nestle because after having an internal team in place, we're able to make sure that the consistency, the effectiveness is controlled and the same across all levels, and also able to create that maximum impact as possible. Second, there is a risk in terms of potential environmental impact. Now that we discovered the use of spent coffee grounds in its ability to remove heavy metals from water, there might be a larger reliance on coffee and production of coffee, but also the harvesting of coffee as well from the farmer's level. So making sure that the coffee is farmed in a sustainable way and harvested in a sustainable way as well, that doesn't lead to deforestation or habitat destruction, is extremely critical as well. However, to mitigate this risk, we understand that we have to push an emphasis on sustainable sourcing. This comes from Nestle itself. So making sure that Nestle is putting a large emphasis on the way it sources coffee, largely with partnerships with local farmers in their countries especially developing countries that decide to pursue this coffee front. But also we have to recognize that there are other ways to actually turn heavy metals or take the heavy metals out of the water, including other biomasses, seaweed, algae. These are all alternatives we're able to actually remove heavy metals from the water as well outside of spent coffee grounds.
2 minutes.
Perfect. Lastly, kind of wrapping everything up and how this is actually tied to the SDG goals we have in mind. These are targeting 3 specific areas in terms of environmental impact. First, looking at food waste reduction. Currently, with Nestle's operations, a lot of this coffee ground is turned into the landfills or into the dumpsters, or is then either seeping or soaking into the ground, into the soils, increasing acidity and also expanding a lot of waste and methane in these landfills. But with this reduction, this waste reduction will actually be able to move a lot of that waste from those landfills and turn it into something beneficial for the environment as well. Second, looking at resource conservation, we're turning something that is potentially negative into a potential positive, actually move heavy metals and toxic metals from the water as well. And lastly, the most important, which is that water quality improvement, which is the whole goal of this, turning this spent coffee grounds, something that you don't need to get after you have your cup of coffee, into something that's beneficial for the environment. And all of these three environmental impacts targets two specific SDG goals in mind. The first being 12.3 and the second being 6.3. So 12.3 allows us to optimize the supply chain, making sure that there is that environmental consciousness and having that environmental sustainability at the forefront. And 6.3 makes sure that we're able to remove these hazardous chemicals, materials, all these from the water streams, to provide a higher water quality as well. So wrapping everything up, we understand that this is a sustainable solution that will take work from all different sorts of communities, especially since Nestle is a very international brand and has a large international presence. But we believe that this solution is one that deserves pursuing. Just think about the way the next cup of coffee you have in the morning, the coffee grounds from that cup of coffee can then be used to purify the water that goes to your next cup of cappuccino. So a whole round of cycles and a very beneficial solution as well. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sitting here with my colleagues on the board, and all I'm seeing are more costs that go into our operations. How do we recover the costs? For example, you said a household is going to send the coffee grounds back to the company. That's got to be expensive on a per cup basis. So how do we recover the costs that we're going to incur?
So we plan to start with the industrial waste that we're already producing at our plants, so we can be assured that those coffee grounds are clean and of a certain quality. And this solution being less costly than current methods gives us a little bit of room to produce the sponges, which is quite inexpensive, but then also to sell the sponges at a profit to industrial waste sites that are producing, say, for example, steel industries produces a lot of heavy metals. So if we can sell this sponge to steel plants, and then we can regain some of those costs.
And definitely just adding on to what Emily said, looking at things in terms of an economy of scale. At the beginning, there are going to be these upfront costs and trying to figure out how to be the most effective producer of these new sponges and how to sell them. But once we get the process established, we believe that, yes, selling to the commercial level in terms of water purification and less on the consumer side is going to really help us recoup those costs and then the end goal in the end term make a profit.
When you remove,
Go ahead, please.
when you remove heavy metals from water, you get two products. You get pure water and you get heavy metals. What do you do with the heavy metal?
Yeah, so it's retained in the sponge, and the coffee grounds actually hold the sponge. So the reason why you can continue to reuse them is even when they're rinsed off, they still retain those metals. So it would be more about the disposal of the sponges, but we can find through our R&D process and our green team a way to safely remove those sponges. But it's better for us to be able to control where those heavy metals go than for it to be in the water with no control.
So, did you just say there's no way to get rid of the heavy metal? That's in the sponge?
I believe we would have to follow up with you. However, I believe that
Okay, so you have not
sit
considered
in,
that issue.
but we don't know exactly how over time that would be affected.
Yeah. So just in referencing what my colleague said to begin with, I didn't see dollars in my head. It's just adding things. So we sink a lot of money into putting structure methods into place. Are you expecting us to be able to recover that? Are you asking us to be an end-to-end owner of this process, and how are we ever going to recover? What does that do to the cost of product? Or what's going on there? Or are we simply facilitating a gathering of useless coffee grounds? At what point are you telling us to disconnect? I mean, is there already infrastructure out there that we could disconnect? Say we find a way to get these coffee grounds and gather them. Are there other Are there factories, facilities, whatever out there that are already doing this where we're simply providing a raw material that they then do all this work to? What are you envisioning for us?
I think it's a little bit of both. It's a multi-tiered process, but first starting with the industrial side, there are a lot of companies turning these coffee grounds into these heavy metal removers, but they're very localized and very kind of like scattered as well. So Nestle, with its international presence, is able to leverage that, way to bring all that together and then sustain it for the environment as well. So it's kind of a little bit of both. We understand that there will be a multi-stage process, but also multi-tiered as well, starting from the industrial side and hopefully ending with the residential consumer side as well.
And then to follow up then, we are certainly going to have to see numbers from you guys if we continue this to work with you. And should I assume that the numbers you give us are going to include the total net cost of even trying to do this? Because kind of echoing back, we're gathering grounds from everywhere. So there's transportation costs, storage costs, labor costs, right? And so we would certainly expect to see all that folded into the bottom line into whether this is financially feasible in any way. And as you guys pointed out right up front, we've been a pretty ardent supporter of environmental type issues from the get-go. Why should we take on this risk? Again, what's the net benefit to our company?
I think it's the perception of Nestle as a whole internationally. I think right now we've been very reactive to a lot of things that have been discovered by the company based on research or like more of a local partner level. I think this is more of a proactive stance where we can actually kind of compound the impact that we're making by doing more of a complementary solution to what we've already been doing. And like we've said, a lot of the tree planting and stuff is a good carbon neutralizer. This is more on the food waste side of things, which is a big producer of what our waste is coming from since we are so international. And talking about those localized transportation costs. I think by strategically placing those industrial facilities where that food, the heavy metal neutralizers would come from, would kind of, I guess, minimize the cost, especially if we're not trying to spend coffee grounds from Asia and fly them all the way over to North America. That would be a little bit counterproductive, like you were saying. But using that with the local region and trying to build it up from there would be more of the team.
And, excuse me, the chairman of our board just arrived a little late. He was on the phone with Vladimir Putin. And I think he has a question.
I was doing a lot of listening. Could you help me understand why we have a responsibility to implement your solution? This is the focus on the ethics piece of this. Why should we be concerned, or why do we have a responsibility to think of this problem and then implement the solutions that you're suggesting?
I think this is a great question, and a lot of why we're here today, because ultimately it's the right thing to do. We're moving away from the, as we heard last night, business is business model. We're moving toward a future that's better for everyone and is sustainable, but ultimately we believe that we can do that profitably. And this is one of those steps toward a greener future and a better future. So if we can be proactive and we can create a solution and we can invest intelligently, we can create a environmentally friendly solution, make the world a cleaner and better place, but also make a little bit of money while we're doing it. So it's definitely in Nestle's best interest to think about these issues early rather than late and implement solutions now.
Yeah, and I think just to add a little bit on to Emily's point, Nestle, as we saw in the beginning of this presentation, has a dominance over 22% of the entire coffee industry. So we have such a large influence that we should be the leader, and that we understand that if we implement these processes early on, other companies will follow suit. Company is the leader in the coffee industry. So making these changes will not only be the right thing to do, but will be the first ones to take action on it, and the whole industry should follow.
Will we lose business? Will people just switch away from coffee because they don't want to be bothered after breakfast and sending the kids to school with sending coffee grounds through the mail back to us?
Not me.
I'm just speaking from personal experience. I drink coffee every day. I think that aspect of it is kind of like thinking about recycling. It's very much okay, I do have to take a little bit of time initially to kind of figure out, oh, is this like, can this be composted? Can this be recycled? But eventually people get it and it becomes a daily habit where it starts speeding up. But I do see the potential flaw in asking consumers for that. But I think coffee is such a established source of caffeine. It is still growing in demand. I know that coffee producers themselves are already trying to grasp at straws, trying to produce more coffee beans, especially with some environmental issues going on. That I do not see demand being impacted by the solution and actually be benefited by kind of subsidiary effects that this solution will bring.
And we understand that that is a source of pain, but a lot of the companies already implement this, but on a much smaller scale. So Nespresso does something very similar to where they set all the consumers on the residential side, people who purchase Nespresso, the packaging, and also the discount for people who want to purchase Nespresso again. So after your Nespresso pods are used, they have to send it in the packaging that comes directly shipped to them using that Nespresso pods. They ship it right back to Nespresso and receive a certain amount of discount on the next purchase. So trying to make it as easy as possible, as feasible as possible, for Nestle to also send it back to the consumer, but also for the consumer to ship it right back to Nestle as well.
Something I didn't see is, it's been alluded to, there's infrastructure costs in doing all this, facility costs, trucking, whatever. Is this really a net gain for the planet? I'm creating all this other pollution to get all this stuff back, do the processing. At the end of the day, am I really doing anything to benefit the planet by implementing this?
I think if you had mercury in your food, you would say it's very, very important for the planet. I think heavy metals in water is extremely dangerous. The issues it can cause are extreme. For example, copper, corroded pipes can cause kidney damage. There's really no end to the health dangers, but it's not just for people, it's also for animals.
Right, and believe me, I completely understand the risk of heavy metal. But for me to create sponges and all the pollution I'm going to create to make sponges, this is really benefiting humanity.
I think that's a great question, also a cost concern. So that's why the first step in our implementation plan is making sure we have a very developed, also very fleshed out research development team, kind of like green team, internally within Nestle first, so it doesn't have to outsource any trials or any sort of experiments or research. So making sure we have that team that we can turn to inside of Nestle to ask those questions, very important questions, to make sure the entire process is sustainable in terms of our solution as well.
And to add on just a bit to that as well, we understand that we want to take this sort of process in phases. So phase one is to localize the coffee grounds the products that Nestle produce that are direct to consumer, the bottled coffee, those coffee grounds, those are already produced in the mass industrial scale. So all the coffee grounds are already collected. So that's going to help us reduce those initial transportation costs. It's not all the way from the consumer to the factory. It's already at the factory, and then will just be transferred to hopefully another localized factory nearby. So taking those steps sort of step by step and seeing what the results are of the process and sort of field tests.
I'm done.
Joan?
Good.
One more. I'm going to come back to probably the very beginning. So what's the net upside to Nestle for even trying to do this?
I think it's cutting down on food waste. I think it is also the improvement on the environment as a whole. This can go into rural countries, rural communities, and also just on a broad scale, it helps with our perception. I know Nestle has, I don't know if you've seen the news, but they have had some little blunders and the ethics side of things. I think that also goes to repair that, especially if we're taking the initiative and we're leading the charge rather than following the charge. And overall would positively impact profit. And while it may not be in the first couple of years, it will be in the long term as water becomes such a finite source as we move into a higher population, higher density world.
All right, take a deep breath. Did it. Feedback time. And then after we give you some feedback, we'll tell you who we are. I'll be happy to begin. Very good communication skills. Great eye contact, talking to us, weren't reading. You were standing a little bit in front of the screen and kind of blocking it. You had some really good stuff on that side of the screen that kind of blocked out. But you're clearly moving out of your student phase into your teacher phase. And you'll be teaching for the rest of your lives. In whatever work you do, you'll be asked to give presentations like this. I encourage you to draw on this experience when you get into the business world and start doing that. And keep it up. Good job.
Yeah, so clearly you can see once we started giving you questions back, a lot of it was the financial element. You know, sure, we'd love to live in a better world. But at the end of the day, we also have to get paid. So yeah, definitely would have some at least high level views of how you would answer that. And if you do answer that, really look at the total net cost, not just dollar cost, but impact cost. And as I was looking at what you presented, I think to me, my mind immediately went to, hey, there's areas of the world where they're a bit more environmentally conscious than we are here. And something like this would get greater reception and foothold. So you may want to think about which areas of the world. It's like, yeah, actually, you might want to pilot this in, the Czech Republic or Australia or, because when I travel overseas, that coffee's from us. It's from this company, far more than any other provider. U.S. market, I don't know, but I do know when I'm around the world, this is the product that normally reaches you first. So that might be something you want to think about. But no, I agree. You guys paced it really well. Your voices were clear, which is awesome. I love the way that when you were talking to us, you didn't just hone in on a spot on the wall or whatever. You guys were acknowledging all of us here. Those are great presentation skills and go a long way.
I always like to leave the teams with some useful advice. What you just did is a variety of public speaking. Public speaking is a lot more than words. It's delivery, it's hearability, it's all those things. People who are inexperienced at public speaking tend to speak too fast. There's a remedy for that. When I was a kid, we used to play marbles. Anybody know what marbles are? Get 3 marbles, put them in your mouth, and try to speak. Take a video of it. You will see after a time you have much improved. Because you've got to be clear to speak through those marbles. No charge.
Next year you'll hand out marbles.
That's a good idea.
Yeah, that little bags of marble. Yeah. I'm just going to chime in. I did not hear a single, so just echoing again, you guys flowed very well.
I'm not a single you guys. It was good.
A couple affirmations and maybe one suggestion. So when I asked the question about the ethics, you really spoke about the responsibility, especially Nestle as a key player. So that was really well articulated. Looking for the language that Nestle uses for itself, for its own aspirations, what's its mission, what's its values, what is it published in corporate social responsibility reporting, what does it aspire to? And so anytime when you're presenting to a company, if you can use our own language and our own values and our own aspirations to show how your proposal is an extension and expansion of what we're committed to, it's really compelling language. I also really liked how you then said, because of our size, we can be a catalyst for systemic change, is fundamentally what you said. Paul Pullman, former CEO of Unilever, he's founded a nonprofit really working to energize system change. And they're working industry by industry. And his contention is that if you get 20% of the key players, for example, to change procurement practices or something like that, you can get collective change. And that's really what you're proposing. Thinking about what are some of the mechanisms of that and how to build out those collaborations, partnership for the goals, SDG 17, it's an expression of that. And you pointed toward that in your answer to that too. That's really well done.
Okay. Feedback from the judges? It's time to tell you a little bit about us. Go for it.
I was just walking by. No, anyway, so I'm Robert Bittner. I'm retired from a 35-year career in designing and building communication satellites. But I'm quite a Renaissance man, so I'm very engaged in environmental issues on the side. And so this really spoke to my heart as to what you guys were talking about here. So I do a lot of teaching, mentoring, and tutoring too. So yeah, you guys are definitely pacing towards, as these other judges mentioned, something that the kind of skills to know what your customer's going to value, and then how are you going to attach to that. Yeah, you guys did.
I've only been judging in this competition for 27 years. And I come away each time better educated than when I started, and optimistic about the future. The optimism is that you guys are going to be in charge. I said you guys. I went to a small private finishing school in central New Jersey, which you may have heard of, called Princeton. After that, I joined the Peace Corps, spent 2 years living and working in central Brazil, where I made $75 a month, whether I needed it or not. Law school at the University of Michigan, practiced law for many years, doing white-collar criminal defense work, and got hired away by some clients. And before I retired about 2 years ago, I worked as the global ethics officer for a British company in the aerospace business. One small anecdote about the company. They started in aerospace before there was such a thing. In 1850, somebody invented an altimeter for hot air balloons, so they could tell how high above the ground they were. Queen Victoria was so impressed that she granted them a royal charter. And today, they make some component on everything that flies, even the International Space Station, which is a long way of saying I work with some people who are much smarter than I am.
My name is Tom Fain. I'm a retired securities litigation lawyer, which means I made my living with my marbles.
As long as you didn't lose your marbles.
Not so far.
Right. Anything else from did you want to say anything? Did they know who you were?
We met last
Yeah.
I actually, yeah. So I'll just add, my bachelor's is economics and statistics, master's in business, definitely broad spectrum, managed suppliers around the world. So yeah, very broad spectrum view of the end to end, and I think you guys did good. Yeah.
Soon you'll be sitting here.
Any advice for tomorrow's presentation?
Keep doing what you're doing. You know your material.
Yes.
That comes out very clearly in the Q&A. So there was no hesitation. You understood the issues, financial, legal, and most importantly, ethical. And then that's what you're going to be focusing on.
It's the ethics piece you're talking about tomorrow. So that would be the part that you would want to reflect back on this presentation, your feedback, to see if there's anything that you want to flesh out, anything that you want to expand, anything that you want to add to.
Can we be asked about finances tomorrow?
No, there's no Q&A in the presentation tomorrow. There will be judge feedback at the end of the presentations. You'll all come in with all the other teams, and the senior judges will give feedback after all of the teams are presented, but there won't be any Q&A. But their focus is on the ethics and how you speak to the ethics. The convention is that they said, hey, you come to talk to the board, we want you to come back tomorrow, talk to us more about the ethics piece. So you want to reflect back on this presentation and see if there's anything you want to add or expand.
I do want to add one more thing about giving you feedback. When we asked you something, and it was clearly maybe a little bit more than your backup material would tell you, for you to say, well, we're going to have to go back and review our material and get back to you on that. By not trying to pull something out of your hat and answer, that's a lot of credit. Because what's the saying? A lie runs around the globe before the truth gets out the door. Yeah. You lose a lot of credit that's hard to get back if you just try and BS something. So kudos to you.
Did you have fun?
Yeah,
It's pretty great.
it's fun now that it's over.
Oh, got some coffee.
Yeah.
Good job.
Yeah,
Thank you.
good job.
Thank you so much.